Apache woman was dragged to his ranch, but the rancher wasn't a bad guy she thought he was. The sun hung low over the horizon, painting the wide plains in shades of gold and amber. The tall grass swayed gently in the evening breeze, whispering secrets only nature could understand. An Apache woman named Nayeli moved carefully through the brush, her senses alert to every sound. She had been taught by her elders to respect the land, to notice even the smallest changes in the wind, the birds, or the distant rustle of leaves. But tonight, the land that had always felt like a protector seemed unfamiliar and threatening. Her heart pounded with fear, and she kept glancing over her shoulder, sensing danger even when none was visible. Nayeli had been living with her people in the hills and forests near the frontier. Life had been simple, yet challenging. Her days were filled with learning how to track animals, gather food, and care for her family. But life on the frontier was never completely safe. There were outsiders who came and went. Some traded fairly, some brought stories of distant lands, and some brought fear. Tonight, fear had found her. Earlier that day, a group of men had come to the outskirts of her village. They were strangers, rough and loud, moving with a confidence that unsettled everyone. Nayeli had watched them from a distance, her instincts warning her to stay hidden. She knew her tribe had faced raids before, and she remembered the stories of other women being taken far from home. She had hoped this day would pass without incident, but it didn't. The strangers moved quickly, and before anyone could stop them, Nayeli was surrounded. She felt strong hands grip her arms, lifting her from the ground. Her heart leapt into her throat. Panic rose like a storm inside her. The journey away from her home was frightening. Nayeli had never traveled so far without the protection of her family or her tribe. She could see the hills of her homeland fading into the distance, replaced by open plains that stretched endlessly under the vast sky. The men did not speak kindly to her, but their words were meaningless to her anyway. They were foreign and harsh. All she could do was follow their lead, trying not to scream, trying not to fight. Fighting might only make them angrier. Every step took her farther from the life she knew, farther from the safety of familiar faces, familiar trees, and the comforting sounds of her village. As night fell, the temperature dropped. Nayeli shivered in her thin clothing, rubbing her arms to keep warm. The men set up camp near a small creek, and she was made to sit by the fire. She didn't move closer. She stayed on the edge, her mind spinning with thoughts of escape, of survival, of the uncertainty that lay ahead. The firelight flickered across the men's faces, but they were shadows to her, threatening, unfamiliar, and untrustworthy. Her stomach nodded. Hunger gnawed at her, but even food seemed suspect when offered by strangers. Her thoughts drifted to her family. She remembered her mother's gentle voice, her father's steady hands, her younger siblings playing near the river. Tears threatened to fall, but Nayeli forced them back. She had been taught that a strong heart must endure hardship without giving in to despair. Still, the ache of loss weighed heavily on her. The night was long, and sleep came only in small, restless bursts. Every noise, the crack of a twig, the hoot of an owl, the distant cry of an animal, made her flinch. Her mind raced with questions she could not answer. Why had they taken her? What would happen next? Who could she trust? The next morning brought no relief. The men were quiet, focused on their tasks. But Nayeli felt their watchful eyes on her constantly. They tied her hands briefly when she moved too freely, a reminder that she was not in control. Fear still pulsed through her, but so did determination. Nayeli began observing the men carefully. She noted their habits, the way they spoke to each other, the patterns in their movements. Perhaps, she thought, understanding them might help her find a chance to escape. Perhaps, she thought, there was a way to survive. Hours turned into days. The journey continued across the plains, the landscape changing from dry, golden fields to stretches of green dotted with sparse trees. Nayeli learned to conserve her energy, to walk quietly, to avoid drawing attention. She watched the horizon for any signs of people from her tribe or friendly strangers who might help her. She learned which streams were safe to drink from, which areas might hide dangerous animals, and which paths offered the best cover. Her survival instincts sharpened, but so did her sense of isolation. She longed for the comfort of her people, the warmth of her family, and the familiar rhythms of her life at home. Despite the fear that never left her completely, Nayeli noticed small moments of beauty along the way. The sun rising over the plains painted the sky in brilliant colors, and she felt a fleeting sense of hope. Birds sang in the early morning air, and she paused to watch them, remembering that life continued even in difficult circumstances. For brief moments she allowed herself to breathe, to feel the world around her not as a trap but as a living place full of possibility. By the fourth day the landscape began to change again. Hills appeared in the distance, and the ground grew firmer underfoot. The men spoke less and moved with a purpose that Nayeli could not understand. She sensed that they were nearing a place of importance. Her heart sank as she realized that her journey was far from over, and yet curiosity mingled with fear. She did not know what awaited her, but she knew that she would have to face it. When the group finally approached a large ranch, Nayeli froze. The wooden fences, the scattered barns, and the animals grazing in the fields were unlike anything she had seen before. She did not know what to expect from the man who owned this land. The stories in her village had painted outsiders as cruel, greedy, or violent. Her mind raced with warnings. She prepared herself for the worst, expecting anger, punishment, or something far worse. Yet, even in her fear, she noticed small signs of care. The animals were tended, the land was cultivated, and the buildings stood sturdy and welcoming. The men led her inside the main house. She glanced around quickly, taking in the large wooden beams, the warm hearth, and the smell of cooking food. She did not let herself relax. She could not. She watched every movement, every gesture, ready to respond to any threat. And then she saw him. The rancher. He was tall and strong, with rough hands and a serious expression. Nayeli expected anger in his eyes, but instead, she saw curiosity, perhaps even concern. He spoke in a calm voice, giving no orders, no threats, only questions.
Nayeli felt her confusion grow.
Could he be different from the others? Could he be someone she could trust? Fear and uncertainty filled her mind as she realized that she was about to enter a new chapter of her life. Nayeli did not yet know whether it would be a chapter of suffering or one of learning, survival, and unexpected kindness. She only knew that she had arrived at a place far from home, and the people here might change everything she thought she knew about outsiders. With cautious steps, she followed the men, aware that her story was only beginning. As night fell over the ranch, Nayeli sat quietly by the window, looking at the moonlight spilling across the fields. The stars twinkled above, distant and untouchable, yet somehow comforting. She thought about her family, her tribe, and the life she had left behind. But for the first time in days, a tiny seed of hope took root. Perhaps she would survive this journey. Perhaps she would learn that not all strangers brought harm. Perhaps, just perhaps, she would find unexpected safety in a place she had feared most. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of hay, earth, and distant flowers. Nayeli closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to feel the rhythm of the land. She did not yet know what the rancher intended, nor could she predict the days to come. Happy, but she had survived the first part of her journey, and that survival, fragile and uncertain, was enough for now. The plains stretched endlessly beyond the windows, full of danger, mystery, and possibility. And Nayeli, with all her courage and fear, would step forward into the unknown. The morning sun broke gently over the horizon, spilling golden light across the ranch. Nayeli awoke to the soft sounds of life stirring outside. The lowing of cattle, the clatter of hooves on wooden floors, and the rustling of wind through the trees. She rose slowly, her body still stiff from the long journey. Despite her fear, a part of her could not help noticing the quiet beauty of the ranch. The air smelled of fresh earth and hay, mixed with the faint aroma of breakfast cooking in the kitchen. It was a strange contrast to the fear that still gripped her heart. The rancher, whose name she learned was Thomas, appeared in the doorway of the main house. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man dressed in simple clothing worn by years of hard labor. His face was serious, but his eyes did not carry the sharp cruelty Nayeli had feared. Instead, they held a calm, watchful patience. He gestured to her with a steady hand, inviting her to come closer. Nayeli hesitated, unsure how to respond. She had been taught to distrust strangers, to expect harm, but the way Thomas spoke quietly and without anger sparked a flicker of curiosity in her. Thomas offered her food, a simple meal of bread, eggs, and fresh milk. Nayeli had not eaten properly in days, but she remained cautious. She watched him carefully as she ate, taking small bites, her hands trembling slightly. He did not push her to eat more than she wanted, nor did he speak down to her. Instead, he gave her space, quietly going about his morning chores while keeping an eye on her from a distance. Nayeli noticed this, and though she did not yet trust him, she could not ignore the difference between him and the men who had captured her. As the day progressed, Nayeli observed the rhythm of life on the ranch. Thomas moved with ease among the animals, feeding the chickens, checking on the cattle, and tending to the small vegetable garden. He worked hard, his movements confident and practiced. Nayeli realized that this man's strength did not come from anger or fear, but from care and dedication. She began to see the ranch not as a trap, but as a place where someone worked to maintain life in order. Still, her fear was never far from her mind. Every gesture, every smile, every glance could still be hiding danger. The children of the ranch appeared later that morning. They were young, curious, and full of energy. Nayeli had never interacted much with outsiders outside of her village, and at first she kept her distance. The children, however, approached her with shy smiles and gentle curiosity. One boy held out a small handmade toy, and Nayeli felt a moment of hesitation. The boy's eyes were bright, unafraid, and full of innocence. Slowly she reached out and took the toy. For a brief moment the tension inside her eased. She realized that not everyone outside her tribe intended to harm her. Some simply wished to share kindness. Thomas noticed the interaction and said nothing, only watching quietly. Nayeli appreciated this silence. She did not yet feel ready to speak, but she understood that trust might grow slowly, through small acts and quiet observation. As the day moved on, she followed Thomas and the children to the pastures, watching how they cared for the animals. Nayeli learned to recognize the sound of the horses' hooves, the way the cattle moved as a group, and how to help gather eggs without startling the hens. Each small task was a lesson, a way to survive in this unfamiliar place, and also a way to understand the man who had brought her here. Despite these glimpses of normalcy, Nayeli could not forget the fear that had driven her journey. She often retreated to quiet corners, sitting by the edge of the creek or under the shade of a large oak tree. There, she allowed herself to think of her family, of the hills and forests she had known since childhood. She remembered the laughter of her siblings, the guidance of her elders, and the warmth of her mother's embrace. These memories strengthened her resolve. Nayeli promised herself that she would survive, that she would remain cautious but open enough to learn about this new world. Thomas, too, seemed to understand that Nayeli's trust would not come quickly. He never forced her to speak or act, never tried to dominate her. Instead, he offered guidance, explained the ways of the ranch, and demonstrated patience beyond what Nayeli had expected from outsiders. Slowly, she began to notice small patterns. He would always check on her food, ensure she had water, and protect her from minor dangers on the ranch. Even the simplest gestures, a steady hand to guide a frightened calf, a quiet word of encouragement, told her more about him than any speech could. One afternoon, a minor accident occurred. A horse, startled by a sudden noise, broke free from its tether and galloped across the field. Nayeli froze, unsure what to do, but Thomas acted quickly, running toward the animal with calm determination. He caught the horse gently, speaking in soothing tones. Nayeli watched in awe. The situation could have been dangerous, yet Thomas handled it with care and skill. In that moment, she began to realize that strength did not always come from force or anger, but from knowledge, patience, and a willingness to protect others. That evening, the sun set in fiery colors, casting long shadows across the ranch. Nayeli sat quietly near the house, observing Thomas and the children as they worked together to feed the animals and finish the day's chores. She felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The ranch was still unfamiliar, still filled with uncertainty, but it was also a place where she could survive and learn. She began to understand that her fear, while justified, might not apply to every person she met. Perhaps she thought this man, this rancher, was not like the others who had captured her. Sleep came slowly that night, but Naeli felt a small spark of hope. She had observed, learned, and survived the first full day at the ranch. She had seen the kindness of children, the patience of Thomas, and the quiet beauty of the land. Though her heart still carried the weight of fear and uncertainty, she realized that not all strangers were dangerous, and that understanding could grow even in the most unlikely places.
Over the next several days, Naeli continued to adapt to life on the ranch.
She helped with simple chores, learned the rhythm of feeding animals, and began to recognize the subtle ways Thomas showed care for everyone around him. The children taught her games, and slowly she allowed herself to laugh again. Each day brought new lessons, and each lesson brought a small but growing sense of trust. She noticed that Thomas never forced her to do anything she was uncomfortable with, and this respect for her boundaries was something she had rarely experienced with outsiders. One day, Thomas invited Naeli to walk with him through the fields. He showed her how to identify different plants, explained which berries were safe to eat, and taught her how to watch the weather by observing the clouds and wind. Naeli listened carefully, absorbing every detail. She realized that knowledge was power, and that by learning the ways of this land, she could navigate it safely. In turn, Thomas noticed her keen observations and quiet intelligence. He began to include her more in daily tasks, trusting her judgment and encouraging her participation. Despite the growing connection, Naeli remained cautious. Fear was not something she could easily set aside. Memories of the men who had captured her still haunted her, and she often stayed alert, ready for any danger. Yet she also noticed that her fear began to coexist with something new, a sense of respect and cautious curiosity. She began to see Thomas not only as a protector but as a teacher, someone whose strength was measured not by force but by care, patience, and understanding. As weeks passed, Naeli's routine on the ranch became more familiar. She learned the names of the animals, helped with planting and harvesting, and even assisted in minor repairs around the property. Each task, no matter how small, taught her something new. She discovered that the ranch was a place of balance, hard work tempered with patience, discipline mixed with kindness, and freedom guided by care. Slowly, she began to let go of some of her initial fear, replacing it with cautious trust. One quiet evening, as Naeli sat near the creek, she reflected on how much her life had changed in such a short time. She had arrived at the ranch expecting cruelty and hardship, yet she found a place where she could survive, learn, and perhaps even find a measure of peace. The world outside her village had seemed dangerous and unknown, but she was beginning to see that kindness could exist even in unexpected places. She realized that trust was fragile and had to be earned, but she also understood that fear could be balanced by observation, patience, and understanding. The days at the ranch were not without challenges. Naeli still struggled with homesickness, and the fear of the unknown never completely disappeared. Yet she found strength in her ability to adapt, to learn, and to observe the world carefully. She began to understand that life was not only about survival but also about the small moments of connection, the lessons learned from others, and the quiet beauty of a world that was bigger than she had imagined. By the time a month had passed, Naeli had begun to feel a tentative sense of belonging. She had learned the rhythms of the ranch, the routines of the animals, and the character of Thomas and the children. Though she would never forget her past or the fear that had brought her here, she realized that she had survived the turning point of her journey. She had learned that appearances could be misleading, and that strength often came in forms she had never expected. And as the sun set once more over the wide plains, casting its golden glow over the ranch, Naeli felt a quiet sense of hope. She did not yet know what the future would hold, but she understood that survival was not just about escaping danger. It was about learning, observing, and opening one's heart, even in the face of uncertainty. For the first time since she had been taken from her home, she felt a spark of trust, small but growing, that perhaps this new chapter of her life might bring something unexpected and good. The days on the ranch continued in a rhythm that was both comforting and challenging for Naeli. Each sunrise brought new work and new lessons, Yet beneath the surface of this routine, a quiet struggle was growing. She was learning to live in a world so different from the hills and forests of her home, but every step forward felt shadowed by the memories of the journey that had brought her here. The fear she had carried for weeks did not vanish, and she realized that trust was a fragile thing. Even as she began to see kindness in Thomas and the children, she could not fully let go of the caution that had saved her life. Thomas, for his part, recognized the walls Nayeli had built around herself. He did not rush her, but he knew that patience alone could not solve every problem. He began introducing her to more responsibilities around the ranch, testing her skills while also giving her opportunities to prove her abilities. At first, Nayeli felt overwhelmed. Feeding the animals, mending fences, and helping with chores that required strength and coordination were exhausting tasks. She stumbled and made mistakes, but Thomas never scolded her. Instead, he guided her patiently, correcting her gently, showing her the right way to do things. This quiet guidance made her realize that strength could be patient, that teaching could be a form of care. Despite the growing familiarity, Nayeli's heart remained wary. She often caught herself watching Thomas and the children carefully, noting their actions, their words, and even the tone in their voices. She was trying to understand them, to predict what they might do, and to make sure she was prepared for anything. It was exhausting, but it also reminded her of the skills she had learned in her village: observation, awareness, and patience. She realized that survival was not only about physical strength, but also about mental alertness and the ability to read others. One morning, a problem arose that tested both Nayeli's courage and her growing understanding of the ranch. A young calf had wandered off into the brush, tangled in thick weeds and struggling to free itself. Nayeli saw it first, her heart leaping with fear for the animal. The calf's cries echoed through the quiet morning, and she knew that if help did not arrive quickly, it could be seriously injured. Without thinking, she ran toward it, calling out for Thomas. Thomas came quickly, calm but alert. He assessed the situation and handed Nayeli a rope, explaining how to secure the calf without hurting it. Nayeli's hands trembled as she worked, but she listened carefully, following his instructions to the letter. Together they managed to free the frightened animal, soothing it until it calmed. Nayeli felt a surge of relief and pride. She realized that the ranch was teaching her more than just chores. It was teaching her to face challenges calmly, to act with care, and to trust in the knowledge and guidance of others. After the incident with the calf, Nayeli felt a new sense of responsibility. She began to take more initiative, helping with chores without waiting for instructions. She learned to anticipate the needs of the animals, to notice changes in their behavior, and to react quickly to prevent problems. Each small success gave her confidence, yet her fear of the unknown still lingered. She knew that life outside her village could be unpredictable, and she reminded herself constantly to stay alert. At the same time, Nayeli struggled with her own emotions. She missed her family deeply and often thought about the life she had left behind. Nights were the hardest. She would sit quietly under the stars, feeling the cool breeze on her face, and imagine the hills, rivers, and forests of her home. She wondered if her family was searching for her, if they were worried, and if she would ever see them again. Belonging in her heart sometimes made her question whether she could ever truly belong anywhere outside her tribe. Thomas noticed her moments of quiet reflection, but did not pry. He understood that healing and trust could not be rushed. Instead, he allowed her the space to process her feelings, while still encouraging her to engage with life on the ranch. Slowly, Nayeli began to see that being part of this new world did not mean forgetting her past. It meant learning to balance memory and experience, fear and trust, caution and courage. One afternoon, Nayeli encountered another challenge, this time with the children. They had wandered near the edge of the property, curious about the forest beyond the fences. Nayeli's first instinct was to panic, remembering the dangers that lurked outside familiar territory. She ran after them, calling their names, her voice filled with urgency. When she reached them, she found that they had been careful, but were standing near a steep embankment. Nayeli quickly guided them back, explaining gently why the edge of the forest could be dangerous. The children listened intently, and Nayeli realized something important. She had knowledge and experience that the children did not. Her past, her upbringing, and the lessons she had learned from her tribe gave her insight that was valuable here. This realization brought a quiet pride, but also a deeper understanding of her own growth. She was not just surviving, she was contributing, teaching, and guiding. Days turned into weeks, and Nayeli's confidence grew, but so did the complexity of her emotions. She felt gratitude for the safety and care she had found, yet she struggled with guilt for feeling comfortable while she had been taken from her home. She wrestled with conflicting feelings of loyalty to her tribe and curiosity about this new world. These emotions weighed heavily on her, yet they also shaped her into someone more aware, empathetic, and resilient. During this time, Nayeli began to notice subtle changes in Thomas as well. He seemed more relaxed in her presence, less distant, and more willing to share glimpses of his own life. He spoke of his childhood, the challenges of running a ranch, and the importance of honesty, patience, and care. Nayeli listened quietly, absorbing his words, and she began to see him not only as a protector or teacher, but as a man shaped by his own experiences, who had chosen to act with kindness and integrity. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Nayeli and Thomas sat near the fire after finishing the day's chores. The air was calm, filled with the quiet sounds of the ranch at rest. Thomas spoke softly about the animals, the land, and the importance of balance in life. Nayeli listened, feeling a sense of connection she had not expected. She realized that trust was not given all at once. It was earned, slowly, through action, observation, and understanding. The walls around her heart were not yet gone, but they had begun to shift. Despite this growing connection, challenges still arose. Nayeli had to navigate moments of fear, misunderstandings, and cultural differences. She sometimes misinterpreted Thomas's actions or the intentions of the children, and moments of frustration tested her patience. But each time she reminded herself that survival was not only about physical endurance, it was about emotional resilience, careful observation, and the courage to face uncertainty. Through these struggles, Nayeli learned more about herself than she had expected. She discovered inner strength she had not fully recognized, the ability to remain calm under pressure, and the importance of empathy in dealing with others. She realized that the world outside her village, while unfamiliar and sometimes frightening, could also be a place of learning, growth, and unexpected connection. By the end of this period, Nayeli's life on the ranch had become a delicate balance of caution and curiosity, fear and trust, survival and understanding. She was no longer the terrified girl who had arrived weeks ago, yet she was not completely free from fear. Instead, she had learned to carry her fear alongside her growing trust, using it as a guide rather than a chain. She had begun to see Thomas and the children not as threats, but as part of a new world she could navigate with care and wisdom. And so, life on the ranch continued, a mixture of hard work, quiet observation, small victories, and emotional growth. Nayeli faced challenges daily, from the unpredictable animals to the subtle complexities of human relationships. Yet she also found moments of beauty, laughter, and understanding. Each day was a lesson, each challenge an opportunity to learn, and each small act of kindness a reminder that the world could be more than fear and uncertainty. As the sun set over the plains once more, casting its warm glow over the ranch, Nayeli stood at the edge of the field and looked toward the horizon. She could feel the strength growing within her, the ability to adapt, to observe, and to trust, even in the face of uncertainty. The journey ahead was still unknown, and the challenges would continue. But she was no longer the same frightened girl who had been dragged from her home. She was becoming someone stronger, wiser, and more capable, ready to face whatever came next with courage, patience, and an open heart. The day began like any other on the ranch, with sunlight spilling over the fields and the animals stirring to life. Nayeli had grown more confident in her routines, helping with chores and observing the patterns of the land. Yet beneath this sense of growing normalcy, the day carried a tension she could not yet name. There was a quiet unease in the air, a subtle change that made her senses alert. Birds flew in hurried flocks, and the wind carried a restless energy that seemed to whisper of impending danger. Thomas, ever vigilant, moved through the ranch with his usual calm, but Nayeli noticed the small changes in his behavior. He checked the fences more carefully, inspected the animals with extra attention, and occasionally paused to scan the horizon. The rancher had faced many challenges in his life, and Nayeli began to understand that he was always prepared for the unexpected. Yet she did not fully grasp the danger that awaited them. It started with a sudden commotion near the edge of the pasture. Nayeli had been leading a young calf back to the barn when she heard the sharp cry of the horses. Panic surged through her as she realized that something was frightening the animals. She ran toward the noise, calling for Thomas. The wind carried the sound of rushing hooves, the lowing of cattle, and the flapping of wings. Her heart raced as she saw a group of wild dogs emerging from the nearby woods, their eyes sharp and teeth bared. The animals scattered in every direction, some panicked, some frozen with fear. Thomas was already moving, his long strides closing the distance between him and the animals. He called out calmly but firmly, directing Nayeli and the children to safer areas. "Stay back! Keep the smaller animals close!" he shouted, his voice carrying authority and confidence. Nayeli followed his instructions, guiding the frightened children toward the barn while keeping her own fear in check. She realized that her lessons from the past weeks, observation, patience, and careful action, were now being put to the ultimate test. The wild dogs pressed closer, circling the animals in a menacing pattern. Nayeli felt her breath catch. She had never faced such danger before. But Thomas remained composed, moving with precise actions that spoke of experience and courage. He gathered a rope and approached the dogs, his voice steady as he worked to protect the livestock. Nayeli watched, her admiration for him growing with every movement. The rancher's courage was not loud or reckless. It was quiet, measured, and purposeful. Nayeli found herself acting instinctively. She helped secure the younger animals, tied gates to prevent further escape, and even managed to calm the frightened children with a steady voice. Each action required focus, courage, and trust in Thomas's guidance. The wild dogs were relentless, but the combination of Thomas's skill and Nayeli's newfound confidence kept the worst from happening. Slowly, the animals began to settle, responding to the calm energy of those protecting them. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, the wild dogs finally retreated back into the woods. Nayeli's body trembled with exhaustion and adrenaline, but a sense of relief washed over her. The ranch and its inhabitants were safe, for now. She looked at Thomas, noticing the calm determination etched on his face. He had faced danger many times before, and he had done so without panic, without cruelty, and without unnecessary risk. Nayeli realized that bravery was not just about fighting. It was about knowing what to do, when to act, and how to protect those who could not protect themselves. That evening the ranch was quiet, but the events of the day weighed heavily on everyone. Nayeli sat by the fire, her hands still trembling slightly as she wrapped a blanket around herself. The children gathered near her, asking questions about what had happened and how the danger had been managed. Nayeli answered as best she could, drawing on her observations and the guidance Thomas had given. The experience had changed her, revealing strength she had not fully recognized within herself. Thomas joined her quietly, sitting near the fire without speaking at first. He observed the calm settling over the ranch, the animals grazing safely, and the children playing quietly nearby. Then he spoke softly, almost as if reflecting aloud. "You did well today, Nayeli. You kept your fear in check, acted with courage, and helped protect those who depended on you. That is not something everyone can do." Nayeli felt a surge of pride but also humility. She had acted instinctively, guided by her growing understanding of the land, the animals, and the people around her. The events of the day sparked a deeper connection between Nayeli and Thomas. She began to see him not only as a protector, but as a mentor and a guide. The crisis had revealed his true character, showing that his strength came from care, patience, and wisdom, rather than force or fear. Nayeli realized that her initial assumptions about him had been based on misunderstanding and fear. The man she had once been wary of was now someone she could observe, learn from, and even respect. Over the following days, Nayeli reflected on the lessons she had learned. She understood that fear was natural, but courage came from knowledge and preparation. She began to take on more responsibility, helping with larger tasks around the ranch, such as repairing fences, tending the animals, and even assisting with minor construction work. Each task built her confidence, reinforcing the lessons learned during the crisis. She discovered that she was capable of more than she had imagined, and that trust, when carefully given, could lead to growth and safety. The children continued to play and learn alongside Nayeli, their trust in her growing as well. She taught them small skills she had learned from her tribe: how to move quietly, how to observe the land, and how to notice changes in the weather. In return, the children taught her about life on the ranch, the animals, and the rhythms of daily work. These exchanges, small but meaningful, deepened Nayeli's understanding of the balance between giving and receiving, teaching and learning, and fear.
And courage! One evening after the sun had set and the ranch had grown quiet, Nayeli walked to the edge of the field alone.
She looked toward the horizon, her thoughts drifting to the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the fear she had felt when first captured, the long days of travel, and the uncertainty that had followed. Now, after facing danger and surviving the wild dog's attack, she felt a profound shift within herself. She was no longer simply reacting to fear. She was learning to understand, anticipate, and act with intention. Thomas joined her, standing silently for a moment before speaking. "You have changed," he said gently. "The girl who arrived here weeks ago would have been paralyzed with fear today. You have learned to act with courage and wisdom. I am proud of you." Nayeli felt a warmth in her chest, a mixture of pride and gratitude. She realized that the journey was not just about survival. It was about growth, understanding, and discovering strength within herself that she had never known existed. The crisis had also changed Thomas in subtle ways. He had seen Nayeli's courage, her quick thinking, and her ability to remain calm under pressure. He began to trust her more, involving her in decisions about the ranch and encouraging her to take initiative. Their relationship shifted from one of cautious observation to mutual respect and understanding. Nayeli realized that trust was not simply given. It was earned through action, patience, and shared experience. In the days that followed, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. The wild dogs had retreated, the animals were safe, and the children continued to play and learn. Nayeli felt a growing sense of belonging, though she still carried memories of her past and the fear of the unknown. She understood that life on the ranch would not always be easy, but she also knew that she was stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever before. She began to teach the children more, sharing knowledge from her tribe about the land, the plants, and the animals. Thomas supported her quietly, allowing her to take leadership in small ways. Nayeli felt a sense of purpose, realizing that she could contribute, guide, and protect others. The lessons of the crisis, the importance of courage, observation, and calm action were now ingrained in her daily life. By the end of this period, Nayeli had undergone a profound transformation. The girl who had arrived at the ranch, terrified and wary of strangers, had become someone capable of facing danger with courage and wisdom. She had learned that trust could grow through shared experience, that fear could be managed with knowledge and preparation, and that strength often came from care and patience rather than force. As the sun set over the plains, casting its warm glow across the ranch, Nayeli stood at the edge of the field, feeling the wind on her face. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the challenges she had faced, and the lessons she had learned. The world outside her village was still full of unknowns, but she no longer faced it with paralyzing fear. She had discovered courage, resilience, and the power of trust, and she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she could meet them with strength and wisdom. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, sparkling above the quiet ranch, Nayeli felt a deep sense of connection to the land, to the animals, to Thomas, and to herself. She understood that the breaking point she had faced was not the end, but a beginning. It had revealed the truth about the rancher, about the land, and about her own strength. From this moment forward, she was ready to face the next chapter of her journey with courage, hope, and a heart open to understanding. The days at the ranch settled into a peaceful rhythm after the chaos of the wild dogs. Nayeli had grown more confident and capable, and her presence was no longer marked by fear, but by quiet determination and attentiveness. She woke each morning with purpose, moving through the chores with ease and observing every detail of the land and the animals. Yet, even as life grew familiar, she carried with her memories of the journey that had brought her here, the fear, uncertainty, and longing for home that had once defined her existence. Thomas had noticed the change in her. The cautious, watchful girl who had arrived weeks ago had transformed into someone capable, thoughtful, and brave. He began to involve her in decisions about the ranch, asking her opinion on which fields needed tending, which animals required extra care, and how to organize daily chores more efficiently. Nayeli found this responsibility both challenging and rewarding. It gave her a sense of purpose and showed her that trust could grow into a meaningful connection. The children continued to thrive under her guidance. Nayeli had begun teaching them simple skills she had learned from her tribe: how to observe the land, how to read the signs of approaching weather, and how to move quietly and carefully to avoid startling animals. In return, the children taught her more about life on the ranch, the subtle rhythms of animal behavior, how to handle tools, and the stories of Thomas's family. Through these exchanges, Nayeli began to feel a sense of belonging she had never imagined possible. Despite the progress she had made, Nayeli sometimes felt pangs of homesickness. She thought often of her family, of the hills and forests she had grown up in, and of the traditions and people she had left behind. These feelings were bittersweet. They reminded her of her roots and shaped her identity even as she adapted to life at the ranch. She realized that belonging did not mean forgetting the past. It meant learning to live with it, to honor it, and to carry it forward with courage and pride. One bright morning, Thomas asked Nayeli to help with a particularly large task: repairing a section of fence that had been damaged during a storm. The task required planning, strength, and careful attention to detail. Nayeli worked alongside Thomas, lifting wooden posts, hammering nails, and learning the precise angles and techniques needed to ensure the fence would hold. The work was exhausting, but it filled her with a quiet satisfaction. She felt capable, skilled, and valued. Thomas watched her carefully, offering guidance when needed but allowing her to complete tasks on her own. By the afternoon, the fence was repaired. Nayeli stood back admiring their work. She realized that this was more than just a fence. It was a symbol of her own growth and resilience. She had learned to face challenges with patience, to trust in her abilities, and to contribute meaningfully to the ranch's survival. She felt a surge of pride but also humility. The lessons she had learned were not easy, and they had come through effort, observation, and courage. The ranch had become a place of safety, learning, and unexpected connection. Nayeli began to see Thomas not only as a protector, but as a teacher and mentor. She admired his patience, his knowledge of the land, and his ability to act calmly under pressure. She understood now that his strength was not in force or intimidation, but in care, wisdom, and integrity. For the first time, Nayeli felt a sense of trust that was genuine and unshakable. As days passed, Nayeli also noticed subtle changes in herself. She had grown more confident in her interactions with the children and the animals. She no longer recoiled at new experiences, but approached them with curiosity and attentiveness. She learned to read the subtle cues in the behavior of the animals, anticipating their needs and responding calmly to challenges. This ability to observe, adapt, and act gave her a sense of control and accomplishment that she had never felt before. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm orange and pink light across the plains, Nayeli walked to the edge of the field alone. The breeze carried the scents of hay, earth, and wild flowers. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the ranch, lowing cattle, the rustle of leaves, and distant bird calls wash over her. She thought of her family, her village, and the journey that had brought her here. Despite the distance, she felt a connection to her past, her present, and the lessons that had shaped her. Thomas joined her quietly, standing at her side. "You have grown," he said softly, "not just in skill, but in heart. You have faced fear, uncertainty, and challenges, and you have learned to act with courage and wisdom. I am proud of you." Nayeli felt warmth spread through her chest. She had expected only survival, but she had gained something greater: understanding, respect, and a sense of belonging. The evening air was calm, and the ranch seemed to breathe with a quiet peace. Nayeli realized that the journey she had begun with fear and mistrust had led her to a place of connection and growth. She had learned that trust was not given lightly, that courage was often quiet, and that strength could be found in care and patience. She felt gratitude, not only for her own survival, but for the lessons she had learned and the people who had guided her. Over the following weeks, Nayeli became fully integrated into the daily life of the ranch. She took on more responsibilities, helping with planting and harvesting, tending to the animals, and assisting Thomas in planning future work. She also became a bridge between Thomas and the children, helping them understand the land, the animals, and the value of observation and care. Her presence brought harmony, patience, and quiet leadership to the ranch. The children grew to admire her not only for her skill, but also for her calm courage. They listened to her stories of the land, watched her careful work, and learned from her example. Nayeli realized that her experiences had given her knowledge and perspective that were valuable to others. Teaching the children gave her purpose and strengthened her sense of belonging. She was no longer simply surviving, she was contributing, guiding, and helping others grow. One morning, Thomas brought her to the far edge of the ranch, where the land stretched into rolling hills and distant forests. "This is yours as much as it is mine," he said, gesturing to the open fields. "You have proven yourself here. You have learned, worked, and grown. I want you to know that your presence is valued, and you are part of this place." Nayeli felt a surge of emotion. She had expected only fear and struggle when she first arrived, but now she felt acceptance, belonging, and pride. That day, Nayeli walked through the fields, feeling the wind on her face and the earth beneath her feet. She thought of her past, of the family and village she had left behind, and of the life she had built here. She realized that she could carry both worlds within her, the lessons and traditions of her people, and the skills, understanding, and connection she had gained on the ranch. Her heart felt full, balanced between memory and present experience. As the weeks passed, Nayeli continued to grow in skill, confidence, and emotional strength. She became a trusted member of the ranch, respected by Thomas, admired by the children, and valued by the animals. She understood the delicate balance of life on the land: work and rest, observation and action, caution and courage. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and danger, and had emerged stronger and wiser. One quiet evening, as the sun set and the sky turned shades of deep orange and purple, Nayeli sat by the fire, reflecting on her journey. She thought of the fear she had carried when first captured, the long days of travel, and the uncertainty of the days at the ranch. She remembered the wild dogs, the calves, the children, and the quiet lessons taught by Thomas. She realized that every moment of fear and struggle had been a step toward growth, understanding, and connection. Nayeli smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. She had arrived at the ranch afraid and uncertain, expecting cruelty and hardship. Instead, she had found safety, guidance, and unexpected kindness. She had learned to trust, to act with courage, and to observe the world with care and understanding. She had discovered strength within herself that she had never known existed. As night fell and the stars appeared in the sky sparkling like distant jewels, Nayeli understood that her journey was not only about survival. It was about learning, growing, and connecting. It was about finding hope in unexpected places, courage in the face of fear, and trust where she had once expected only danger. She felt a quiet gratitude for the lessons, the land, and the people who had guided her. And in that quiet moment, Nayeli knew that she had truly arrived, not only at the ranch, but at a place of understanding, resilience, and belonging. She had survived the trials of her journey, faced her fears, and discovered the power of trust, patience, and care. Her heart was open, her mind alert, and her spirit strong. The plains stretched endlessly before her, full of possibility, and Nayeli felt ready to embrace whatever the future might bring. She rose from the fire, taking one last look at the stars above. The ranch, the land, the animals, Thomas, and the children had become part of her world, just as she had become part of theirs. The journey of fear, uncertainty, and struggle had led her to a place of connection, growth, and hope. Nayeli smiled softly, feeling the warmth of the fire and the calm of the night settle over her. She was no longer simply a girl taken from her home. She was a young woman who had learned to face fear, embrace trust, and discover strength she had never imagined. The night was quiet, the wind gentle, and the stars bright. Nayeli felt at peace, knowing that the lessons of the past had prepared her for the future. She understood that life would continue to bring challenges, but she also knew that she could meet them with courage, wisdom, and an open heart. The ranch was no longer just a place of survival. It was a place of learning, connection, and belonging. And Nayeli, having faced her fears and discovered her strength, was ready to live fully in this new chapter of her life.